I used to think that St. Luke probably made a mistake in the way he makes Jesus narrate the story of the master and the servant in today's parable. If the punchline is about the attitude of humility of the servant, the first part of the narration should have already focused on the servant. If I were to rewrite the parable, I think it should read this way. Which servant among you who has just come in from plowing and tending sheep in the field would expect his master to invite him to sit at table and to have dinner with him? Would he not rather expect to be told to put on his apron and wait on his master while his master eats and drinks? Would he not expect to be told to eat and drink only after the master is finished? And then what follows becomes more logical. So should it be with you? Kasi the way it's formulated now, parang hindi logical. So should it be with you? When you have done all you have been commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what we were obliged to do. The problem with Luke is he focuses first on the master. And honestly, I feel that the master in the story is behaving in an abusive way towards the servant. Imagine, the servant has just finished plowing the field and tending the sheep. And then he comes home and the master would not even give him a chance to rest. He is already asking him to do yet another task, not just to cook, not just to cook for him, but also to put on his apron and serve the master while the master is eating and drinking and not minding the fact that the servant who has already worked the whole day has probably not even eaten anything yet. You know, I have heard similar stories, horrible stories, about the way some OFWs working as domestic helps abroad are treated by some employers. Sometimes nga their employers might even be Filipinos. Honestly, if I were to give a title to this parable, I would probably call it the story of the abusive master. Well, good thing. They had no CCTVs yet during that time that would capture the footages of the master's abusive behavior. And there was no social media yet where they could post the footages to the master's embarrassment. Well, I think you know what I'm talking about. And so, when the story switches to the servant, who is not even supposed to expect any gratitude or appreciation for what he has done for his master, and on top of it all, he is still expected to say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what we were obliged to do. You know, something within you is revolted because the servant doesn't seem to mind at all that he is being abused or being maltreated by the master. Well, I used to think that way, I said. But now, on second thought, maybe this is not just St. Luke formulating it. Maybe the Lord really told the story this way, precisely to rub it in. Mahilig mag-exaggerate si Jesus to drive home a point, to make the audience think. Like, who, between the master and the servant, is actually stripped of dignity? No, not the servant, but the master, the abusive master. Jesus has a way of saying, you can keep your dignity intact even before the worst act of cruelty. Which is exactly what Jesus himself did before the people who stripped him and beat him up and slapped him and called him names. Jesus, has a way of saying that it is your persecutor who loses dignity by being cruel, unkind, or abusive. He can rob you of your dignity only if you allow him to. Let that be our first point with regard to what Jesus regards as proper attitude towards an abusive master. Now, the second is about a servant making no big deal of the service rendered, meaning not counting the cost, not expecting any reward or even appreciation. Perhaps we can put the story in another way. Let's say you eat in a restaurant and you find a bag in the seat that you occupy. You check the bag. It has important documents inside and a big amount of money in it. You return the bag to the owner because it has an address. And the owner is so overwhelmed by your honesty. He takes a video of you handing the bag and he posts it in the social media and it goes viral. And then your friends and people will ask you if you received a reward for it. But you say, "But I just did what I had to do. I was told since kindergarten never to take what does not belong to me. It was not mine. So I just returned it to the owner, and what's the big deal?" That's the kind of attitude that the gospel endorses. One does not claim entitlement to a reward, even for a good deed that is done. Whether it was 1 peso or 1 million pesos, you should probably have done the same thing anyway. Kasi tinuruan ka. A society that makes big deal of this is actually projecting itself. Unwittingly, what they are saying is, "Oh, I don't know what I myself would have done if it was I who had found the bag." Well, to say it is no big deal is to say, I expect you to do the same thing if the bag were mine and you were the one who had found it. This kind of behavior should be ordinary, not extraordinary. It should be the rule, not the exception. In my homily about the dishonest steward, somebody commented to me, "Bishop, I always thought God represents the master." And I told him, "Oh, you'll be surprised. There are other parables too, where it is not the master, but the servant who represents God." I gave him the parable of the master who wanted the fruitless fig tree to be cut down. You remember that parable? The cruel master? He doesn't represent God. It's the gardener, the one who gave a second chance, who represents God. And today's parable is another good example. I am reminded here of the late Bishop Claver. he spent his leisure time doing hard work in the garden. He's a native of the Ifugao region. One day, a visitor in a car mistook him for a gardener. He stopped by and he said, "Manong, andyan ba si Bishop? Manong, is the bishop there?" And the bishop said, "Oho, yes sir." And the man said, "Ibaba mo nga yung dala kong regalo para sa kanya sa sasakyan. Medyo mabigat kasi. Diretso mo na sa kusina. Saan ba si Bishop?" So he said, "Can you unload my gift for him? It's a bit heavy. Bring it straight to the kitchen. Where is the Bishop now?" And he said, "Diyan ho sa bahay, diretso. At the house, straight ahead." And Bishop took down the sack of corn, and the visitor was even boasting that the corn was freshly harvested from his farm. And Bishop carried it to the kitchen, and then he dressed up and met the guest. Now, imagine you were the guest, and out comes the bishop, who you thought was the servant. This is how Jesus has revealed God to us, not as a master who demands to be served, but rather as a servant who makes no big deal of his service because he does it with pleasure. He does it with love. And so, at the Last Supper, he told his disciples, "Who is greater, the one seated at table or the one who serves? Is it not the one seated at table? But I am among you as the one who serves."